Hi, everybody, and welcome to day 8 of our Heaven podcast, where we are unpacking together, Becky and I, we are unpacking together what heaven might be like, why it matters, what we think about it, and what hope we can find in the promise that God gives to us about heaven. So, welcome back to day 8, Becky. Great to have you here.
Great to be with you, Chris.
Good. And today we're going to go back to the Old Testament. So each day we're taking a passage, a few verses from the Bible, different parts of the Bible, which reference or talk about heaven and look at what we can learn from them. So great to have you back with us today. Psalm 16 is our passage for today. Becky, do you want to just tell us a little bit about the Psalms, what they're kind of all about before I read that psalm to everybody?
Yeah, so we are going to a section in the Bible which is full of song lyrics, essentially. That Psalms means songs. So they would have been written perhaps for individuals to sing, perhaps for choirs, but they're written, they're very personal expressions mostly from a guy called David. Some Psalms are written by others. And David was the king of Israel. That is the nation that the Old Testament primarily centers its story around. And it's a nation chosen by God, chosen to be the people of God. It's the nation which Jesus would eventually be born into. But David was a king who was described as a man after God's own heart. He had a relationship with God that was perhaps unique at the time, very intimate relationship, a relationship which caused him to write these very, very honest songs. Um, and we're looking at one such song today. David did not have a simple rule. His time as king was fraught with enemies, with betrayal, with several character flaws on his own part. And so every psalm kind of gives us an insight into something that's going on in David's life. We don't know precisely the circumstances which give rise to this psalm today, but as we unpack what David says in this, I think it can give us a pretty good picture of some of the things that he's wrestling with, some of the things that that are going on in his life at the time. So we're going to Psalm 16, which is called a miktam of David. I think we'll pick up on that language in a moment, will we, or will we pick up on it now?
No, I think. Why don't we read it and
Yeah,
then
let's read
we
it.
get. So again, the psalms sometimes come with a little note, don't they, at the top before you get into the meat of them? That can be a musical direction or something like that. And yeah, we get this phrase, "a miktam of David," which we'll kind of come back to because it could be quite significant for us a little bit later on, I think.
Read it.
Yeah. So Psalm 16 says this: "Keep me safe, my God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. Apart from you, I have no good thing. I say of the holy people who are in the land, they are the noble ones in whom is all my delight. Those who run after other gods will suffer more and more. I will not pour out libations of blood to such gods or take up their names on my lips. Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. I will praise the Lord who counsels me. Even at night my heart instructs me. I keep my eyes always on the Lord. With him at my right hand I shall not be shaken. Therefore my heart is glad and my tongue rejoices. My body also will rest secure, because you will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. You make known to me the path of life. You will fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand."
So I think there's a little bit of language in there which was perhaps familiar in David's time, but is lost on us a bit today. So um, he's in the opening of the song, talks about those who run after other gods will suffer more and more. I will not pour out libations of blood to such gods.
Mm.
What does that mean?
Yeah, great questions. That's an amazing phrase, isn't it? Libations of blood. Well, it was very common in these times where this was being written for people to follow different gods, all sorts of shapes and sizes of different gods. But there was quite a common thing that went on from all the different groups of people around, all the different gods that they were following, that they would make sacrifices to those gods, often horrific sacrifices, actually. And they often involve blood, so killing something and sprinkling blood and that kind of stuff. And so David is saying here that if you run after other gods than the one true God, you'll suffer. He's saying, I will not offer sacrifices. I will not do anything that is seen as an act of witness or praise to or adoration of other gods, and libations of blood, sacrifices, those kind of things would have been ways that people would have praised and honored the gods of their culture. So he's just making it very clear, I'm not going to do anything, I'm not going to sacrifice anything, offer any kind of blood offering, anything like that to any other gods.
Yeah.
So
Okay, that makes a
that's
lot more sense
important.
now.
Yeah.
It's also worth us remembering as we read this and we're thinking, well, that's a terrible song lyric. That this was written in Hebrew and it probably sounds quite lovely in Hebrew. But
Yes. Bit like when you hear a song that was originally in English being sung in a different language, you
yeah,
think, well, it doesn't even rhyme.
yeah.
What's up with that? Yeah, fair point. What about this phrase, my portion and my cup? That's another
Mm.
phrase that might be a little bit unusual for us.
Yeah. Well, it kind of helps us as we read along. My portion and my cup, you make my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. So this is picking up on this idea that Israel were promised by God a land, a physical land, the Holy Land, we might call it now. This promised land where they would be able to live in safety, and God would be their God, and they would be a people, and they'd be recognized by others as a people. And when they were given this land, boundary lines were drawn up and assigned to different people and different tribes, and it was their inheritance. They were given land that they could freely live in. And David is saying, Lord, you are my promised piece of land almost. You are the place where I can dwell in safety. Um, and the boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places, as in I'm happy with my lot. I'm happy with the place that you have put me in, and because you are my portion, you are my promised piece of land. Does that make sense?
Brilliant. Yeah, it makes great sense. Yeah.
Mm.
And that's great that he's. I mean, we're going to move on to talk about what's the point of all this. Well, one of the key points is he's saying, all my hope is placed in you. We talked yesterday or on day 7, whenever anybody's listening to this, about reliance on God being like a key value, a key thing. Well, he's saying that, isn't it? You're my portion of my cup. I'm relying on you. You're everything for me in my life. It's great, and that's a key point of these verses. Yeah. I just want to explain this miktam thing then
Yeah, go
that
on.
we mentioned earlier. So again, it's a note that is in this bit right at the beginning of the psalm, a miktam of David. Lots and lots of discussion in people who write about these things about what that actually means. Nobody really knows, I think, is the honest truth. It's probably some kind of musical or literary kind of term. But one line of thought is that this psalm was inscribed on like a piece of stone, which is what they would inscribe things on in these days, and left in the temple in a very prominent place. The kind of temple being the center of Jewish worship, where people would go to express their worship of God. And so you would have come across this miktam, this slab, if you like, of stone that was inscribed with these verses from this psalm on it, so that it would have been continually in people's thoughts and in people's minds, and by seeing it a lot, hopefully sinking into people's hearts. Now, we have to be careful because we don't know for sure whether that actually happened, but I do think, and I really like that idea of this psalm being one that can kind of sink into us, and that perhaps we can keep coming back to as a reassurance, hope, promise of what's to come, reminder to us of where our reliance and our dependence should be. So, yeah, whether that's really what it means, we don't know. There's lots of argument about that. But I think the principle of it being in a prominent place where people could see it, I think that's a really great principle, and actually has something that we might come back to in terms of what could we do with this, what could be next for us when we're
Yeah,
thinking about this psalm. So
yeah.
yeah. So let's dig around then a little bit in what's the point of all of this. As you look at this, Becky, are there things that are really striking you that we haven't talked about yet, that you kind of think, well, this seems to be a key point from this psalm?
Yeah. I think the bit that seems to be sort of the climactic point of the song here is that final few verses. Um, Therefore, my heart is glad, my tongue rejoices, my body will also rest secure. You will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. You make known to me the path of life. You'll fill me with joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. And I'm kind of thinking, as I'm reflecting on what you were saying about the beginning of this song, as David promises, I'm not going to offer sacrifices to any other god, any other, he would have called them idols, that is, false gods. Um, that his confidence is in a God who can do something about his life and even can do something about his death.
Yeah.
And an idol or any false god can't do anything about that. There's the recurring theme in the Old Testament that idols, other gods, are made by people. And of course, if a person makes it, that idol can't do anything really for that person, and certainly can't do anything about that person's eternal destiny. But David's security and his hope is in the fact that his God can do something even once he's no longer breathing, that he will not be abandoned to the realm of the dead, but that God is able to do something even about his state of decay when he is in the grave, which is amazing,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Amazing. What about for you? What are you seeing
Yeah,
as the
I
point to
had a very
this?
similar thing to you, really, and I felt like the verse 8, the psalm seems to pivot to me. So the song seems to pivot. So we've had the first 7 verses are David reflecting on who God is, and almost like I almost kind of feel like his present experience. He's kind of thinking about, I'm safe, God. You know, you're my refuge, you're my point of safety. You're the good things in my life. You know, all of that kind of stuff. And he almost feels to me like he's reflecting a little bit on his current circumstances. And I'm not going to follow other gods and all that kind of stuff. And then he says in verse 8, I keep my eyes always on the Lord. With him at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. So I've got my eyes on God. I'm not going to be shaken in this life. And then that almost feels like a little pivot, because then he seems to me, the verses that you read, 9, 10, and 11, to think about the future as well now, and to anchor some of that hope that he's been talking about in what is to come too. And you said, you know, that as God has been his portion and his cup in this life, so he will be in what is to come. And that's why we picked this psalm today, because it's an Old Testament passage that reflects on what is to come. So there's this pivotal moment in the psalm, it seems to me, and David's reflecting not only on how amazing God is for him in his current situation and his current circumstances, all that God is doing, but also what God is going to do in the future for him. And that even on the day that David's earthly current life ends, God isn't abandoning him. He's still there. Even when his body decays, God is still there with him. He's still going along with God. And so David seems to reiterate some of what we have said before, that God doesn't abandon us in death. And that we can take confidence and encouragement from spending an eternity with God. It seems to me that there's a promise here of a bodily resurrection, which is something we've talked about a little bit and we'll talk about more. So, a bodily resurrection for David and an eternal destiny with God.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that phrase, my body will also rest secure.
Yeah,
It's not just sort of a spiritual kind of, he's not talking about a soul or something like that. He's talking about something physical.
yeah,
And interestingly, this is a verse that is used by followers of Jesus in the New Testament, the part of the Bible written after Jesus, when they were proclaiming Jesus's resurrection from the dead. They used these words of David and they said, look, the words of David have been shown to be true. That Jesus has been raised from the dead, that he was the one who was not abandoned to the realm of the dead. Uh, he was the faithful one who did not see decay, and that God has raised him from the dead. And those were the words they used. And that promise that what David has said here is demonstrated in Jesus and is secure for us as well.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm depending on when listeners are listening to this, they may not have heard yet, or they may have heard a message that I did in the second part of our Sunday sermon series on this, about what heaven's going to be like. And in there, one of the big take homes I said is that Jesus is not the only one who gets bodily resurrected from the dead. That actually that is what awaits all Jesus followers. And that may seem far-fetched to us. It may seem almost unbelievable to us, particularly maybe if we're exploring faith, to think, well, how does that work? And it does, it is something that's very difficult for us to comprehend, but God's already done it once. And if God can do it once, he can do it again with all of us. And that I think is a really important thing.
So shall we dig into our next question? What's the
Yes.
difference? What difference does this make?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Well, I think so much of this "what's the difference" stuff is like building up as we go through this podcast, isn't it? I hope it continues to be that hope and joy that this promises us, this picture that it's painting for us of we've talked about a new heaven and a new earth, a bodily resurrection of people, of us, those who are following Jesus, inhabiting this new heaven and new earth, and that should make a difference to our lives now,
Yeah.
that prospect of what is to come. And it should make some of the differences that it's making for David in this psalm. That it should help us to be able to say, well, my portion and my cup are secure because of the inheritance that has been guaranteed for me, just like it was for David. And I won't follow and pursue other gods.
Yeah.
And it might not be the same kind of gods as it was in David's time, but there are plenty of gods in our culture and in our life that we pour out sacrifices to, and that should challenge us to say, I'm not going to pursue those other things because of who God is and this stuff that God is doing and promising me in the future.
I'm going to answer the what's the difference question quite personally
Yeah,
today, if that's
yeah,
okay,
of
because
course,
actually
yeah,
this verse has been something that's been quite pivotal in my own life and in my own faith. When I was at university and in the couple of years after university, I became very, very afraid about the idea of death. And it really got into my head. And I would often have times where I thought, and this does sound a bit silly now when I say it, I thought I was dying. I thought there was something wrong with me. I would suddenly feel like a twinge, or my heart would beat a bit faster, and I would get really, really anxious and feel like I was going to die. And I shared this with my now husband, Matt. And he, in all his wisdom and the fact that he doesn't like to just offer commiserations, he likes to really dig into like fears and things like that. He said, "Okay, so what are you afraid of?" And I said, "Well, I'm afraid of dying." And he said, "What are you afraid of about dying?" I said, "Well, it's obvious. I'm afraid of dying." And he said, "Well, do you think God won't be with you?" I was like, okay, I'm like uncomfortable with where this question is going. And he would say, "What do you believe would happen if you died?" Okay, I like so I'm getting increasingly uncomfortable. But as I went away from that conversation and I found this verse, and it began to, it was an opportunity for me to really dig into that, the scary question. And somebody said it in our office, in fact, the other day, that sometimes we can be confident about heaven, but very scared of the doorway in, very scared of that moment of crossing through from life into death. And these verses, "You will not abandon me to the realm of the dead. You will not let your faithful one see decay." They are a very tangible reminder to me that there wouldn't be a second where God wouldn't be by my side. Whatever happens, whatever will happen, God is going to be there. He's going to be with me, and he will not leave me. And
yes,
I can't be taken away from him by death, by dying, by illness, by anything like that.
yeah,
So to me, these verses make all the difference in the world.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, yeah, and brilliant, Matt, as well,
Yes.
is to be asking those kinds of questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really powerful.
And that might make you listening feel quite uncomfortable, because actually that feels like it is uncomfortable to think actually quite literally about your own death. Um, but I think if you are somebody who feels nervous about that, and as I talk to people about my own experiences, I realize actually quite a few people do think about that. And even if you're young and healthy, you do think about things like that. So I'd encourage you to go back to these verses and take heart from them and really let the truth of these sink into those fears, because I think we can confront them. We don't have to sweep the fear of death under the rug, actually.
Yeah, and we don't talk about it very much, do we? Because it's not a cheery subject. But yeah, see, just I think this is an okay link to make. What you have, as you share your story, what I'm thinking is you've done that miktam thing. If it, you know, if that's what it means about inscribing something such that it sinks into our consciousness, our being, our soul, you know, all of that kind of stuff. By using these verses in the way you've described to bring you a peace and a reassurance and all that kind of stuff, that seems to me to be what, whether it Miktam means that or not, there's no doubt things like this were inscribed on tablets and left in the temple so people would see them and understand them and reflect on them and allow them to sink in to themselves. So again, I wonder, we're probably getting into the what's next thing here. Can we find ways to inscribe these key and very comforting and reassuring verses about things we probably, if we're honest, all find uncomfortable and distressing and disturbing to think about, such that they bubble up to the surface of our lives and our thinking when we're beginning to find ourselves disturbed or discomforted or reflecting on things that we're struggling with. So I think, yeah, and perhaps people can share with us ways they find to do this would be really good on social media or whatever as they reflect on this. How do you inscribe things?
Yeah.
Is it literally writing it out and sticking it up on your wall or your fridge or whatever? Is it going back to and reading it again and again so that it sinks into your mind, you remember it? You know,
Yeah.
what is it?
Yeah.
But I think that'd be a really great what's next
Yeah.
to take away from today.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love that. I think that's the perfect next step, isn't it? To really help it almost helps us to rewire our own mindset around these things, doesn't it? When we have those constant reminders in tangible places. So yeah, it'd be really cool to hear, how do people do that? How do they, have you ever done something like this? Have you ever had, I don't know, maybe people have family mottos
Yeah,
or
yeah.
or certain things that they've set up as things that they want to have inscribed in their own life and
Yes.
in their own hearts. And could you use a verse like this to help you as you think about your hope in heaven?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
brilliant.
Do you want to go back to see if we can come up with a tweet for
Oh, yeah, I
this?
forgot about a tweet.
So,
Yes.
shall I? Here's one that I wondered about. Because God doesn't abandon us, even in death, we can take confidence and encouragement, and I think this is important, rest secure.
Brilliant.
Because God doesn't abandon us, even in death, we can take confidence and encouragement and rest secure. That's my tweet for the day.
I love it. I haven't got anything to add to that. I love it. I've experienced it. It's a good tweet. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's been another really good one. Thank you, Becky. Thanks for sharing so
Thank you.
personally as well. I think that really helps ground it in something that I think people listening to this I have, and I'm sure others listening to it will have found
Sure.
helpful, and a helpful way to use this glorious thing of the Bible
Yeah.
to really make an impact and difference in our lives. And that's our heart. That's what we want for people here at ABC and people who are listening to this.
Yes, absolutely. Great. Well, we can't wait to join with you for another podcast episode. We hope this has helped you. We hope it's inspired you. We hope that you might take that next step, maybe do something to inscribe these words of hope into your heart, into your mind. And yeah, we'll catch up with you soon. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thank you, Becky.